My name is Ben, and I'm a tester. So as Bernie mentioned, last year there was the release of the HealthCare.gov website that's part of the Affordable Care Act here in the United States. And I guess first question I have, does anyone here not know anything about HealthCare.gov? Who does not recognize this woman? Who posed for pictures and suddenly found herself all over the news. So how did I get involved in HealthCare.gov? Let's take a look at a short video. I think we have sound.
On the issue of security, there was a security breach that arose recently that I read about, at any rate. And what I think is very important here, because the issue of privacy has been raised, and I think that that has been answered, because very importantly, there isn't any health information in these systems, but there is financial information. So my question to you is, has a security wall been built? And are you confident that it is there and that it will actually secure the financial information that applicants have to disclose?
Yes, ma'am. I would tell you that there was not a breach. There was a blog by a sort of skilled hacker that if a certain series of incidents occurred, you could possibly get in and obtain somebody's personally identified.
Isn't that telling? Isn't that telling?
And we immediately corrected that problem. So there wasn't it was a theoretical problem that was immediately fixed. I would tell you we are storing the minimum amount of data because we think that's very important. The hub is not a data collector. It is actually using data centers at the IRS, at Homeland Security, at Social Security to verify information, but it stores none of that data. So we don't want to be...
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair to recognize Mr. Shimkus.
So, the blog they're talking about is my blog. The sort of skilled hacker is apparently me. So the first thing I got out of that listening, if your site security practices are dependent on the skill level of the hackers that will attack you, you're in trouble. The other thing in the question there, she says, has a security wall been built? And software security is more about just putting in some tight perimeter. You need to have security built into every level. We don't want to have security systems that it's like there's a guard at the front door of the bank. Or here in New York City, I noticed to get in the bank, you have to swipe your ATM card, and the door's open. But then to give you access to anything in the bank once you've shown you have an account, that is not security. So it's more than a wall. You need security at every point. So back to the question of how did I get involved in this? Maybe it'll click. And this is why. My granddaughter, Tiffany, was looking for health insurance for her because she's not my child, but my granddaughter, though my dependent, my employer doesn't cover her. So I was looking for options. I knew there was the new health care law. I heard what was on the news. I hadn't really been involved in the politics of it. And I wanted to go to this site, as was advertised, see what my options were to get insurance for her. And I stepped into a mess. And what kind of mess did I step into? We're going to need sound again.
Brian, it's incomprehensible to me that the rollout of this administration's signature piece of legislation has been such an incredible mess. You tried to get some answers from the president's point man on the issue. Was he able to give you any?
He gave us some answers, Anderson, but he danced around some other questions. He said basically that they acknowledge that there are problems. He says this is not acceptable, all the glitches, people getting booted off, etc., and that they have people working 24/7 to try to fix these problems. So I followed up with this question. But many argue you had many months to get this booted up and to really perfect it. Why then still so many problems?
So we went through a testing period, and during the testing period to identify problems, create a punch list, fix those things. The president said from the beginning, with a site like this, of course there are going to be glitches. But let's understand why there was the initial problem. We had 250,000 concurrent users at one time. I mean, just for perspective, Medicare.gov in a given month has 5 million unique visitors. This in the first 3 days had 8.6 million unique visitors, which speaks to the demand.
And he essentially acknowledged they were not quite ready for all of that demand, especially in that 3-day period, Anderson.
Well, first of all, any kind of rollout like this, you're supposed to anticipate for the highest volume of visitors possible. And it clearly goes beyond just unique visitors. I know you've spoken with people who say this was just a sloppy setup. I've spoken to a writer who's looked into this who says kind of the front end, the actual website stuff that people see, and the back end, that there were multiple contracting companies involved in the production of all of this, and that it seems like they weren't communicating, they weren't coordinating.
It seems that way, Anderson, and as you mentioned, we've talked to experts. The expert I talked to helps corporations design major websites. He says this was sloppy, that it's inefficient, that there was too much code left on the website, which slows everything down. He said it doesn't work at the most basic levels. So I asked Mr. Simo, basically, you know, who signed off on this? But if you don't want to tell me who signed off on it, can you tell me if that person had any experience designing a web application or any experience just in managing one, or any experience at all?
Brian, there was a team that worked on this night and day, put together a website called HealthCare.gov where in 3 days, 8.6 million people went to, identified problems, are working through those problems, are going to fix those problems.
The other thing that they can't give you a figure on how many people have actually now signed up, I just don't buy. I mean, I just don't believe that. You know, because they're you know what they're promoting is, well, we had all these unique visitors, we had an overwhelming number of people actually looking, but actually signing up, actually creating accounts, the fact they're not able to give numbers to me, I just don't buy that they don't have those numbers. What do they recommend for people who've been trying to sign up for days now? What's their advice?
Their advice is, if you're frustrated, keep going back, call a help center. There are help center lines on there. I tried to log in today, I couldn't, but you can see a help center number at least. They say keep going back, keep trying. You've got 6 months to sign up for this. They really hit home that message. It's frustrating now, they acknowledge that, but you've got 6 months to sign up for this. So they say keep going back.
Yeah. Brian Todd, appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, Anderson.
So when the software's broken, try again. Try again. Try again. So, in trying to get information, I went to HealthCare.gov, and I would get pages like this that say, sorry, we can't find that page, as I'm browsing looking for information. I get lots of pages that look like this, not found. I would get this, system's down at the moment, and the next moment it would be back up, and then it would be down again. Also saw some wonderful things like open up this all topics menu, and I got no options. Then finally got it to a point that I could get to try and create an account. And if you, I don't know if you can see on this screen, maybe too small, but their username and password rules require symbols, require an uppercase, a lowercase, and I think someone that has English as a second language wrote it. Because even it took me many attempts to get the right combination of things at work. There's a couple of interesting things here. It says an @ can be in your username. It cannot be the first character because it kills it. You can put a slash in it, but they take that username later on and put it into URLs and construct URLs out of it. So a slash in it creates something that doesn't work. So overly complex. This is not looking like the consumer website. When I had heard government executives say this would be like shopping on Kayak for tickets, or be like shopping on Amazon or on eBay, and I look at this and this is not how I shop on those places. And then I'd get to all the way to the end to try and submit to create my account, and I would hit things like please wait, or say your account cannot be created at this time, the system's unavailable. Now the key to this is there's 2 or 3 pages I've gone through to get to this point, and you have to start all over again when it hits the failure. Then it gave me things like your account can't be created. It'd tell me my security questions all had the same answer. I couldn't have the same answer. That wasn't what I entered. The error message did not match The conditions. So what do I do as a tester? I put on my X-ray specs. And in web testing, most modern, probably I'd say now all modern desktop browsers have developer tools built in that you can see code being executed, you can see all the data that comes from the web server to your system. So I turned on developer tools and just started looking at the responses coming back from the web server to see if there might be a disconnect between what I was seeing in the user interface and what was actually happening. So we have, so one of the things I saw, independent of that, is the system would expose what usernames exist in the system through the error message. In many cases, this may not be a problem, but to me, this is a problem on a national healthcare website that potentially 20% of the country must use, and we probably want to protect what accounts are there to make it harder to access accounts. It'll also reveal if email addresses exist. And in this case, it does not say it in the user interface. It says your account can't be created. Call us. However, looking in the developer tools, I see the response to the REST request comes back and says email address is not unique. So it's telling me this email address exists in the system. So they've created a portal by which someone could automate, send it a list of email addresses, see which ones exist and which one don't to help narrow an attack. I'd submit, get all the way to the end, and it would tell me, check your email. We sent you an email. But if you can see down here at the bottom, developer tools are showing me a 500 error was returned. That process that was supposed to send me the email did not get that far, something failed, but still tell me to check my email. So I finally get it through. And I get an email to validate my account. It took about 3 hours to get to me. So I click the link, try to create account. It says I didn't check my email quickly enough. I was checking my email every 10 minutes or so waiting for this email. So I called them, or well, in this case, did a text chat with them, and I explained what happens. It took 3 hours. And their response is the emails sometimes take up to 3 days. Wait 3 days. Well, if it times out after 3 hours, 3 days is going to be too long. So back to the CNN clip, keep trying. So I finally get authenticated, finally get an account created, do the email validation, and I try to log in and I get a blank page. So I try mobile device. Does that do the same thing as a desktop? I get blank page with an unexpected error on it and a blank error ID. Not much more information. And when I saw this, I went to Twitter and I saw there were lots of complaints of people getting blank pages when they attempted to log in. Oops. So what was happening when we tried to log in? A 400 error was being returned, which is a bad request, typically means a malformed URL. It can also happen if there's data in the header that is significantly invalid that the server can't process it. In this case, I discovered that it was the size of the cookie data. So I looked at the cookie data, and it was well over 4K of cookie data, because when I went and looked on the Learn side of the site to read the help documents, every time I visited a page, it added the name of that page to a cookie to keep track of where I've been. And so I got the request, delete some of the cookies, and suddenly I can log in. And Time Magazine picked up on this. Also, as part of this, Consumer Reports picked up. And after I talked to them, what they published, their recommendation was stay away from HealthCare.gov for at least another month if you can, which was different than what we were being told. Try again. Just keep trying, keep trying. These issues were not being addressed quickly. Another way they exposed email addresses was through their email subscription system. So once you sign up, you're signed up for emails. They provide this system that you can subscribe or unsubscribe to the emails that they send you. And you get different responses depending on whether or not the email address you submit exists in the system or not. So this one on the left, it's showing me it exists. The one on the right, it doesn't. It returns me to log in. So they're giving different results that give us information about what's happening on the back end rather than masking that and hiding that. So I mentioned they have an email validation. A lot of websites have this. You sign up for the website. You give them your email. They send you an email that has a validation code that you either click on or enter and go back to the site and validate that I own the email account that I gave you. Well, HealthCare.gov did this. This seems a reasonable security thing to do. However, there was a slight problem with that. And that's that when you submitted that last step, if we look down on the bottom, what I've masked out says email ID. That is the password reset code. So not only do they email it when you hit that last step where you submit it and they send you the email, they also display it in the browser. So you don't actually need that email to validate that you own the email account. So they've created a situation where one can use someone else's email to create an account. Email change notifications were sent to the wrong address. And these were just things I was hitting as I'm trying to use the site. Plus, as a tester, I want to go a little bit off of this looks interesting, and I chased a few of these. So if you change your email address, they send a notification to your new address, not the old. So if someone's account is hijacked, they're going to notify the person who hijacked it, not the person who had their account taken. I found under some error conditions, user info was sent over HTTP rather than HTTPS. And I saw it in a number of places. Once was on the profile page. It appeared that my session timed out. And as you can see, if it's big enough, red box on the left, it went over HTTP. The box on the right that I've masked out has my username. And then amongst that data is some demographic data and some history of some of the pages I viewed. So it's not necessarily PII, but it's information that could help get closer to it or be valuable to someone, information that at least I believe should be protected. And as we can see here in the browser testing, if you're doing things that should be secure, watch it. Most modern browsers will give you some little warning that indicates that page has something on it that's not secure. So, after I started finding some security issues that I thought were important enough to tell them, I contacted their help people again, and I asked them, to whom can I report security issues? Their response was the FTC. The Federal Trade Commission will take complaints. And I said, that doesn't quite apply. I've not been defrauded. There's a design problem. What do you do? So then their follow-up was, call your local law enforcement and they'll tell the FBI and put it in a database and they might get back to you. Not a very effective way to collect bug reports. And I did not try contacting my local police department and telling them I might have taken a ride with them for other reasons if I did that. As many sites do, they have security questions to secure your account. So if you want to reset your password or otherwise need access, alternate access, they have security questions. In the directions right now, this is what this page currently looks like. It says, we need you to pick a few questions that only you will be able to answer. So what kind of questions do they ask? What's your favorite radio station? What was your favorite toy when you were a child? Your favorite cuisine? First name of oldest niece? A relative's phone number? Name of your favorite pet? A significant date? City your mother was born in? Name of childhood friend? Your parents' wedding anniversary? Name of manager at your first job, or nickname of your grandmother? Not as bad as some I see, but these don't sound like things that only the person answering the question will know. These are things that you could potentially find on a place like Facebook or Twitter, or just ask someone and they may tell you, because we don't associate these to be secret things that need to be protected. And I have the same complaint with a lot of banks using the same things, and typically what I hear from tech people The developer response is, well, lie to it. Answer some different question. The problem with that is these are meant to be cognitive aids to help you come up with something. So now you're creating a situation where someone's going to have a hard time remembering what it was that they used to secure their account. In the case of HealthCare.gov, there's no alternate after this other than calling them, and I haven't yet found out what they do. So then even less secure, there's an option that you can have someone else help you sign up for medical insurance. This could be someone at one of the approved centers, it could be a friend, whoever. And to protect your account from third-party access, they asked you to create another security question. These are your only options. Where was your first job, your favorite high school teacher, oldest child, or childhood nickname? So at least according to the documentation, armed with any of these, someone can call in and get access to your information. This is still the case with these. Then I started an application, didn't complete it, and it processed the application I did not submit. I got all the way to the end, and there was this option that I had to agree to them to share it with other parties and do different things I wasn't quite sure. So I clicked the button to just save it, don't submit it. And I log in the next day, and on my account it shows it's still in progress. But I also get this notification that I can view eligibility results. But I didn't submit it. The system says it's in progress, and I can see eligibility results. And I get this eligibility letter saying that you're not eligible, we will pass it on to Medicaid. I didn't even submit it. So now with this account, they put me in a position I have to go through the appeal process, which at least last I read, they still hadn't implemented the software to process the appeals. It was also returning stack traces to the browser in some errors. The danger with this is that if you return the stack trace all the way out to the browser, you're revealing information about the internals of your system. If you're using common libraries, open source tools that may reveal what version, what you're using, which may not be a problem, but if there's vulnerabilities known in any of those and you haven't patched them, people can now discover what those things are. And it may also help reveal some things about the architecture of your own code that could be taken advantage of. How about a little just HTML injection in fields? Type in input and it puts an input box within the input box. As I'm doing this, I'm wondering who tested this. Were they really bad at bug reporting? And in the midst of this, I watch the news and I hear, well, no one has ever tried to access information on the site that they shouldn't access. However, the auto-suggest in some of the forums suggested otherwise. I just type a semicolon in the search box and it gives me other things other people have tried. So people have been experimenting. In this specific case, it's not a really big deal. This just goes to their Google search appliance, and they left in default configuration of auto-suggest on for everything. After this came up in a congressional hearing as well, although the person who brought it up made a bigger deal over it than it was, but they quickly fixed this. But to me, these are the sorts of things that suggest there was not sufficient testing, or people made a poor case of making the case to fix these things or address these things, or that they weren't considered in the design and the setup. For something of this scope and this scale, these are stupid mistakes. So then comes password reset codes. If you ask to reset your password, it does the same thing as email verification, and it sends you an email with a code that you click on to come and reset your password. They return that code to the browser. So you don't actually need access to the email. And it's a nice little REST service that you could easily automate. Give it a bunch of names and email addresses and get back your results and collect reset codes. So it come back, it was labeled correlation ID, but if you had any reset code, you could see it looks like it. It's just a Java GUID. The other thing is they'd send the password reset and username together in email. I see other sites do this, but considering the scope of HealthCare.gov and in the political environment it was in, that you're probably a likely target for attack. Email is not a secure form of communication. If any of you think it is, please change your ways. It's not a secure form. So a better way to do this would be to separate the username in the email, in the password reset code. Some of the systems I've worked on, we've done just that. We send a password reset code, they use that, they come back, they have to tell us what username goes with it. This gives everything that's needed in one place. The other thing, the password reset codes never change. And it was the same as the email verification code. I believe this may have been a result of them fixing that email timing out. That in the first week or so I get the messages, emails took too long, you waited too long, and I suspect they were expiring. And their fix to that appears to have been they made it so they never expire. So here's an account I created on October 20. If you look down at the bottom, you can see that number ends with 8DB. And then I reset password on October 24th. We have the same code with 8DB at the end, November 1st, the same code, November 3rd, the same code. That code forever stays the same. So if a password reset code is compromised, it appears that it's forever compromised. So they have a privacy policy on the site that says they collect information that they send to third-party, they use third-party measurement tools, like a lot of us do, Google Analytics or other analytics tools or marketing tools. And in that, they say no personally identifiable information is collected by these tools. Well, those tools aren't intended to collect that information, but you have to be careful to not actually send them that information. So again, under an error condition, or no, in this case it was just with the password resets, it would send my username and password reset code to third parties. So here's two of them, pinged them and double-clicked. There were some others, I emailed them. Most of them were horrified. Some of them told me we changed our code and made a special condition for HealthCare.gov because they didn't want this information. And then once HealthCare.gov did address this, the thing still showed up in some error conditions. So error conditions, systems down. It redirected, sent them my account activation and reset code. So they fixed it, but if you tried to reset a password while they had a maintenance window, they sent that information out to others. It also discloses what username goes with an email address. So now we can connect two pieces of information. Email addresses are public, and you can find out what username goes with that. And again, this is a wonderful little REST service they've built around the password reset functionality that you can submit an email address and it returns the user, or give it the user email address and you get the username or the other way around. Also, it discloses security questions that go with a name and email. So it prompts for first name, last name, your email address. Who keeps those secret? You can give it those items and it will say these are the security questions. So I know Paul's name and email, although he's Canadian, he's not going to be in there. But put in a username and email and then get their security questions, and now I can go look them up on Facebook or try and become their friend and somehow get the answers that I want. So let's put some of these pieces together. We can request a password reset and get the password reset code response return in the browser. So we can start with a username or email address, get the password reset code. Once we have that password reset code, we can find a valid one that we've received, or we've created an account just for this, see how the URL is constructed, and we construct a password reset link using that code returned in the browser. Again, this is something that could be easily automated. And then we can go to the password reset page, and it will give us, with that information, it gives us the 3 security questions that go with that. we can take that one more step, and if we submit bogus answers to the security questions, it gives us the email address that goes with that username. So someone could automate, create a bunch of usernames, get through, collect this whole chain of things one at a time, get all the information to where now you can start some social engineering or some investigation on Facebook or other such places. So this one, again, I contacted HealthCare.gov customer support and reported it. They didn't seem to care. So I asked me to speak to a supervisor. Same sort of thing. We don't collect those. The FTC collects those reports. You need to go somewhere else. And at the same time, in the midst of this, on the HealthCare.gov blog, they were saying, please provide your feedback in social media. So I obliged them. And, and as a result of that, so this one was serious enough to me that we can connect these pieces together and get all the information except the answers to the security questions, which may be easily discoverable. And I contacted a few people that I knew in the press, and a couple of them had contacts in HHS or CMS, and passed that information on, and then they made the initial fix the next day, and then over the weekend they made a few other fixes to put some security around that password reset functionality, and then announced that they fixed it. And what they said, their official response was, we're eliminating this theoretical vulnerability, which I've discovered means that no one that they know of has taken advantage of it yet. It doesn't mean it's not real. It just means they do not know of any instances that it's been taken advantage of or that it's been exploited. So they're going to prevent users from seeing specific reset functionality when trying to reset their password. So I was happy that they responded to that and that they responded fairly quickly. But there were still some problems after they fixed it. How are we on time?
13 minutes.
Okay. Wrong one. One of these. So, after they fixed this, the talking points that came out was, yeah, there was a theoretical problem. We fixed it, as you saw in the video at the start. And then we're not storing data. We are only storing the minimum amount of data. We don't collect data. We're using data from other systems, the IRS, Homeland Security, Social Security. But we're not storing that data. We're just getting it from someone else. So this is kind of the sort of thing that showed up in the press as a result of that, where they'd say we have the federal exchange or the state exchanges. They contact the hub, which is this middle system, and then they connect all these back-end systems. So your data is secure in those back-end systems. If an account is compromised, no one gets access to what's in those back-end systems. At least that's the story they were telling. So what is exposed in the browsers? So just some examples of some of the data points. Well, let me back up. So when I said store in the browser, the way the application works is that each time you enter a field in the form or a couple of fields, click Next, it submits your application as a JSON document to their servers. Then in response, it does whatever back-end processing needs to happen, and it returns that entire JSON file back to the web browser. In that JSON file is information retrieved from those back-end systems. So like when I did the identity verification, then retrieved now to the web browser, and every time I log into my account, my social security number is displayed. I did my income tax verification, and every time it came back, after that, when I logged in, I would see it showed what my last paycheck looked like, who I worked for, the date I started, the number of hours I worked. Basically, my pay stub was in there. returned from those backend systems all the way out to the browser as a JSON document. So these are some of the things in this list right here from my blog. Not necessarily in any order, things that we don't say store much data, that at least there was space in the structure to store. I don't know if they populated all of these or not, but at least to me this raises concern that these things existed in the browser. So I'm seeing addresses, family members, zip codes, attested, who's taking care of your child, or adult caretaker ID. Whether you're blind or disabled, all this information pulled from all these back-end systems come out all the way to the browser, which to me is really poor design. And it was working in government systems that I learned that part of security is you keep your processing as close to that data so you don't send it where it doesn't need to go. So rather than return all this data to the browser, a good design would process it, return true, false, or whatever is needed, the minimum needed for the system making that request to make the decisions it needs to make. So basically anything entered into the application would get potentially returned to the browser. So the question comes up, did they test this? How did they test this? I don't know. I was not involved. But there have been little bits of pieces of things that have come out. One was a report where they identified their risks ahead of time, and we here see that it was initially opened a issue on August 9th for the October 1st release. And it was that the time frames for testing in Dev and Test 2 are not adequate to compute full functional system and integration testing activities. So what do you do to mitigate that? Over on the right it says work with CMS to establish a realistic schedule. But they still have an October 1st deadline. Not enough time to test. We'll change the schedule to test. Not enough time to test. Sounds like not really addressing the problem. One other thing that I saw in the congressional testimony was that when executives, both government and contractors, were asked about security in the context of privacy and keeping personally identifiable information secure, the responses typically almost all across the board was there were no high findings. So knowing that this is the government and the government likes standards and the government is going to document this, I went looking. There must be a document that defines what a high finding is. And there is, and that's the FIPS publication 199, and it says the potential impact is high if the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability could be expected to have severe or catastrophic adverse effect on organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals. And in going down into some more details in the documents, that basically means you're disrupting global markets or you're killing people. That would be a high finding. And at least when I first read that, I said, that doesn't seem like PII is going to do that unless there's some mass leakage of everything. So I dug some more into the documentation and found that PII, anything covered by the Privacy Act, is by definition moderate, not high. So by definition, these weren't high. So someone at some point, it appears, prioritized, said, we'll deal with the high ones, which totally bypasses privacy and security questions. So, open season. Yes. There's more tonight, but let's talk first. So, actually, two things I'd like to hear from all of you as you saw this. What are some of the oracles that you saw me use or that I described? How did I recognize there were problems? I didn't have specs. I didn't have documents to tell me this is a problem and this is not a problem. And I'm also interested in what others' oracles might be. The other thing is, do you see any lessons that you can apply in your job testing from this? I'd like to know.
Okay, we have a 30-minute window. We'll talk loud because I don't have a mic. Just raise your green cards. Okay, I can use this one, yeah. Okay. One moment, I will write them down first. Come on, folks. No questions for Ben? Okay.
No questions.
26. Okay, let's start.
Hi, I'm Jessica Nickel, and I'm with Doran Jones as a test lead. And Ben asked what heuristics that I noticed, and I think one that I noticed and is a heuristic that I use frequently since learning about it is the few hiccups heuristic. And I noticed that Ben took a look at the history of the kind of data he knew might be stored across government databases. So he didn't just say, okay, what's being stored here in the healthcare. He also said, what kind of information is stored by the IRS? My taxes, historical information, and that sort of thing. He did recognize the user experience. He went into it as a user. He intended to use it to do his own personal to suit his own personal needs. So he was using it very specifically in that mindset to get started. And the problems he encountered, he didn't encounter as somebody trying to test it, but as the kind of typical user. And I think that that's what makes stories really important in testing, is thinking about who might be using it. So those expectations, and then thinking about the claims that the product makes and what it says it's going to do. Click here and you'll get an email, or not so much. And then the statutes heuristic in telling us, oh my God, nothing's secure, even though the government's telling us it's completely secure. So I think just the hiccups heuristic is actually quite important and valuable to think about the different methods that kind of were immediately applied and probably not specifically identified before.
Following question? Yeah.
Yes, the hiccups heuristics, I just put at least the short names up on the screen. That is something that I apply, that it goes well beyond just what's written in the documents. It's what are the expectations of users. In this case, my expectations were just kind of set by what I saw on the news, not because I read any requirements document. And in this case, I would think that if you're working on this project and it's very public and it's in the news and it's the #1 priority of your president, that you would pay attention to what's being said in the news, what the president is saying, what government executives are saying, and apply those as sources for requirements. Or if they differ from your tech requirements, raise that as a potential problem.
Okay, Michael Bolton.
Update, Ben. First of all, I can't go without saying this. This is the brilliant work. It's just exemplary of what a great tester does. So, patient, on a certain level, dispassionate, and a beautifully told story. When you brought that up, I wanted to offer two other heuristics which are now on the list, which some people might not be aware of. You've got the hiccups list there. There's two new ones, relatively new anyway. One, and I think you probably encountered both of them. One of them is explainability. When I see something that doesn't make sense to me, it doesn't fit my ability to explain it, or indeed when I'm talking with a programmer, and the programmer is awkward or confused or hesitant in explaining something, That's a heuristic for identifying that there may be a problem here. And I think certainly when you talk to the support people and you didn't get good explanations, you applied that heuristic. Another heuristic that has been added to the list is the inconsistency with their experience of the world, how things actually work in real life. That's a heuristic for identifying a problem. So those are two oracles in fitting with your request, the oracles that I saw you use, but they're in addition to the ones that you have illustrated on the left. The mnemonic is now few hiccups, because that's what we wanted to deliver to our customers, few hiccups. So I thought I'd amplify that a little bit. Thanks.
Thank you.
Follow-up from the audience? Okay, follow-up. Mr. Quality Frog, did anybody involved in the congressional hearing attempt to contact you before, or did you find out after the event?
So no one contacted me about this congressional hearing before. After this hearing, and as you notice, Secretary Sebelius did not mention my name. However, I instantly came under a denial of service attack in that my email lit up, my phone lit up, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, any way that the press could potentially find me, they were finding me. And which led to, I talked to a lot of people, did a number of interviews that led to stories, and it was an interruption for a while. and eventually I had to stop responding because I do have a day job that I have to do. Oh, and what I was getting to in that is I also was contacted by a couple of congressional committees and questioned about what I knew and what I didn't know in my experience. None of them asked me to come testify, possibly because I didn't speak the way the experts they wanted to speak, which is because they asked me questions like standards and what is the industry best way to do this, and I would talk about the context and this would make sense here and this is why this is a problem here, which potentially doesn't sound like it's coming with the authority that some of the people they did call to testify that would say this is the best practice.
Okay. 156 in the front, Paul Holland.
Hi, I'm Paul Holland.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Ben. Were you faced with any threats of legal action based on what you were doing?
No, I wasn't. And I was very careful about my testing. So everything I did here was from externally exposed interfaces, used in the way that was intended, rather than trying to break or access something that was not my information. If I had permission to test this, I had a whole other set of tests that I would have tried. But I was very careful because I did not want people in black suits knocking on my door in the middle of the night. And I think that's important too, to understand both what our community or your personal ethical and legal boundaries are so that we don't pass them and get ourselves into trouble.
Okay, still on the same thread. Ian, 150.
I'm being advised to stand up. I'm Ian. A follow-up question to that. As a known hacker, do you now feel that you're being watched or followed?
I'm being watched by all of you. No.
Okay, this ends the thread. Go to a new one, 147.
I think technically it was part of the same thread, though. But an attempt to answer your question about oracles, two that weren't mentioned or reiterated was just comparing the functionality to general sites that people use to give information, and also the way people are commenting about on social media. And I also learned from your presentation as far as the developer tools, because I've been prone to accidentally activate them and not know what I'm doing.
Yes, one other thing I'd add to the developer tools is take screenshots as you're testing. They're great cognitive aids. Even if you don't write down everything you did, you may find they're useful long after you take them.
Okay, next question, 246.
Hi, I'm Lanessa. I actually, my answer was in response to your first question. I won't repeat the hiccups heuristics, but the first thing that came to mind for me was comparable products, consistency with the way things usually work in terms of flow. And what I learned is, echoing Jay, developer tools. I use them now, and I know to look for things in the URL, but I usually don't turn on the developer tools unless I see something curious going on. So I think that's one of my big takeaways is to learn to use them intelligently and all of the time. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, next one, 207, please stand up.
Hi, Thomas Vaniotis. I'm curious, not so much as a political question, but just as a practical question about what you may have learned about software development in government, and maybe even though you weren't asked to speak to Congress, what would you say to Congress if they asked you?
There's more to it than what you can explicitly state in standards. As James said in his talk yesterday, there's a lot of tactic knowledge. There's the application of expectations that we're not explicitly documenting, and those things matter. And I spent the first 9-ish years of my career working on mostly government systems or systems that the government was going to buy. And in that testing, we were very much focused on what is the stated written criteria and what specification or requirement or law is the authority for me to say this passes or fails. However, when I moved to commercial software development, I learned that I couldn't write a bug report and say this ISO standard or this mil spec or this contract says we must do exactly this. And I had to learn to make a better case for why something is a bug or not. And in government software, my encouragement is communicate. One of the things that I read in reports that after this, the team, when they brought in a team to address issues and try and fix the site, when last fall we were told it was going to be fixed by, I believe it was December 1st, that team, one of the issues that they had was finding people that were in charge and would take responsibility. And it sounded, at least externally, like the reports where there were very little communication between people that needed to communicate. So communication is essential. Look at things beyond the written specification.
Okay, go to the next question. In the front, 240. Tim?
Yeah, hi, Ben. Did you ever find healthcare for your granddaughter?
Not yet. What? We did. We tried again and again and again, and part of what I discovered was an issue that I didn't bring up, and maybe will tonight on AST Live, but I'll bring it up right now, is that applications, as they updated the software, the applications, that huge JSON document could get data in it due to error or due to their changes that the current version of the software would not accept. And you could get an application corrupted in such a way it could never complete. And I got a number of them in that state using up many email addresses, which I don't think your typical consumer has many email addresses to go to, although I guess they could sign up for many with Google or Hotmail or other such providers. But I went through many, and they keep getting into some state that was broken, and then you have to start all over again. So our most recent attempt was last week. Started brand new, fresh, got all the way through the initial application, but my daughter did it in her name this time, which is not a software problem, but a law problem, possibly, is that you have to predict the future and know whose tax return someone's going to be on depending on who signs up. So my daughter tried, but because she has no credit history, she couldn't get past the identity verification. So that's where we are now.
Okay, still have 15 minutes left. I have 5 green cards on the stack and a virtual green card. Oh, I see a 6th one. One moment, please. First, from the audience in the world. Ben, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but will you ever contact to come help to retest the system?
Do I have what?
To retest the system, if they contact you to help.
I would be willing to be involved in testing if I have time. I do know some individuals who are involved in testing or building parts of it now. I am hoping for some improvement. And one other thing I do need to clarify is that most of those issues I've mentioned have since been fixed. The cookie issue, cookies getting too big to log in, was happening as late as last week, but I couldn't reproduce it this week. So I don't know if something changed or just the conditions are different now.
Okay, next question, 144.
You asked for, well, one thing, I mentioned this to you earlier, but I wanted to make sure everybody knows, is that this is a really, really good way to explain exploratory testing and what you do every day to people who don't necessarily know how testing works, because it's an example that they can use, that they understand, and they saw on the news. And you asked what oracles and what kind of takeaways that we have for our own work. And my big thing is I feel like a better understanding now of the consistency with purpose heuristic, because I tend to think of that just in terms of like, well, does it do the thing that I want it to do? But here a lot of the problems are, it's consistent with a purpose that's not a good purpose. It's consistent with the purpose of getting data out of it maliciously. And also, it does a lot of things that it doesn't have to do to achieve its purpose. So I thought that was kind of an interesting wrinkle that I'm probably going to be chewing on, is that idea of non-simplicity of purpose.
Thank you.
Okay, next question, 168. In the purple shirt. Yep. Please stand, yeah.
Hi. One, to answer your first question about oracles, one heuristic I came across recently, which is principally used as a design and engineering heuristic, but I think is good use for testing, is something called Stride. It's something that Microsoft came up with for security. Surprisingly enough, why do they need it, I wonder? But I think that's useful for testing. Stride stands for spoofing, tampering with data, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. But I find it useful for, I think some of the things you demonstrated covers those types of testing. I think it's a good way to think about testing an application functionally and with security as well. So I just wanted to put that out too.
Can you repeat the name of that?
Stride.
Stride.
Yeah.
And where is that documented?
It's a Microsoft heuristic, so if you go to Microsoft and put that in there, you should find it, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
The man with all the answers, 42.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Keith. One point and then one question. Both contractors that worked on this system have full service software quality assurance and testing practices that are aligned towards the accreditation and certification models that James Christie was talking about, so clearly that guarantees nothing. My question is, at what point do you feel there's a possibility to cross over into ethical hacking, or hack, because lots of people get in trouble for not necessarily doing anything malicious, but snooping around systems and things like that. And has anyone approached you about that, or did you take legal advice or anything about where the line is between testing for free and ethical hacking?
So for me, the line is that I was not going to do anything that could be perceived as trying to access someone else's data. And that I was not going to do anything that would provide or add load to the system that went beyond what normal user was doing. And I did have a task I was trying to complete. There were some accusations, people saying I was hacking the site or doing things that I wasn't, but I created an account for purpose, tried to use it. There was a report of a case that someone received access to another person's documents in the system, and I could see in the requests that were being made. There were document IDs and things in there that if I had permission, I would have tried accessing other people's documents or try and decipher some of the connections between the data in that JSON document and the URLs that were requested or the requests that were made. But I didn't do that because I did not have permission to do that. And partially it's as a professional and is going into that, I kind of watch those things in the press and what does the government prosecute, what do they not. So there was a case that as I remember, a bug with Apple, with iPhones or something with the Apple registration, and you could iterate through and get people's information. And the people who did that just to demonstrate there was a problem and they shared it with the press, they were prosecuted and found guilty even though they had good intentions. So it's stories like that that help remind me to keep in check and not step over boundaries. I don't want to do anything that gives any appearance that I'm trying to do something or to access information I don't have access to. So another example with this, I'm trying to find my granddaughter insurance. I also have the state-run, state-created Medicaid site that we dealt with. And their usage terms are different than HealthCare.gov. Their usage terms are such that I'm not going to try testing there, even the sorts of testing I did on HealthCare.gov, because they had very explicit terms about it may only be used for this purpose and nothing else, and I was uncomfortable even doing what I did here with their site. Although their site has some similar worse issues than this. It created a situation where you had to lie to the software to get it to validate in order to get to someone to fix it. So under penalty of perjury, submit false application and then ask for help. So we didn't do that.
Last follow-up to 250, James Christie.
Hi, Ben. Do you think it's fair to say that you're in a bind if you'd gone to the extent that...
Whoa. Someone's calling me.
If you'd gone to... You were careful and you stayed within responsible boundaries. And therefore, does that mean the government was able to say it was only a theoretical vulnerability? If you'd gone to the point where you'd demonstrated what they would consider a real vulnerability, you could have been arrested?
If I had actually exploited vulnerabilities, I suspect they might have taken legal action.
Do you think that was what it would have required for them to say it was more than a theoretical vulnerability? I get the impression that you're in a bit of a catch-22.
Well, as I discovered watching some of the testimony, that it appears theoretical means that it has not been exploited. At least that's how I'm interpreting it. But to me, it's a real vulnerability, even if it hasn't been exploited yet. And that's the difference. A vulnerability is that something's vulnerable. There's possibility for something we don't want to occur. The exploit is when it's actually happened or is taken advantage of.
Okay, you have 6 minutes left for 3 questions. 007, Mr. Bond.
License to test?
I think he has. Yeah, he has.
Hi, I'm Harrison. Were you updated when issues were repaired? And also, with the repairs and the patches, do you see like a cascade of bugs or issues that then appeared afterwards? And what were they?
So for the most part, I was not notified of anything fixed. The only thing I was notified of was that chain of vulnerabilities in the password reset functionality. And again, that came through people in the press that had contacts rather than me directly having contacts with CMS or any of the contractors. And the other part of the question? Can you repeat it?
With all the patches and the fixes and all that stuff that they repaired, was it then a cascade of more issues that then followed from one thing? Like Like
So-
the password reset, you know.
Yeah, so there's the one of those emails and the reset codes never changed, that appears to be a result of them fixing things. I didn't see, right now I can't think of anything that was they made a fixed and created something new that I saw to be an issue. They did slowly fix issues, so like all that data returned in the JSON document, if I look at it now, there's a lot of nulls in there, that they're taking data out or they're masking out parts of Social Security numbers. And as I was actively watching that last year, it was one at a time. And it was like they'd fix one thing that either I reported, and I don't know for sure that they're doing it in response to my reporting it, but they were fixing these things one at a time. Or when they fixed them, they'd fix them in one place, and I'd say the same thing, see the same sort of issue exists somewhere else, and that wouldn't be addressed. But over the months, it appears that the issues I've found other than that reset have been addressed. There also is one other one right now where they're sending some data to third-party advertising companies right now, where it asks you some demographic information and income information not tied to your name, but they send that data to YouTube and to DoubleClick and Facebook.
If you have another question, please come afterwards because I have to continue. Yeah? 204. Sorry, 207 it is.
Okay. Hey, I'm Claire. I'm interested, Ben, what did you learn about test reporting as part of this experience?
Good question, as I'm here wanting to answer that, but you've asked it, so I will. One of the things with this is it was a very political environment that this was in. There were people that wanted to deny there could possibly be any problems, and there were people wanting to use the site, issues with the site as a reason to say the law is bad. And I'm of the opinion that, especially with the security things, it doesn't matter if the law is good or bad. People's data needs to be kept secure, and that sort of thing should not be political. And the success or failure of the law should not be dependent on the website. You know, I think that success or failure of the law should be on its own merits, not a bad website implementation. So in that environment reporting, I tried to be very careful about what I said and how I said, or even if I was out on Twitter and tweeting news links related to it, I wanted to be very careful about trying to understand the political biases of those I referenced, or how I reported things so that I could provide factual information and not feed into the political frenzy that was around it more than would already be done. Because I know people would take things I say and take them one way or another and attack me or attack the site or take things to mean things I didn't. Such as we saw in the video clip, it was interpreted that there was a breach. There wasn't. There was potential, but there wasn't a breach.
Okay, this is the final question. 232.
Hi, I'm JCD. To answer your question briefly, the San Francisco Depot, particularly time, the fact that you noticed that a GUID lasted over time, I really appreciated that, and that was an interesting thing to note, something I might not have noticed. As far as my question goes, so I'm guessing you're probably familiar with like OWASP, and there's a lot of very technical attacks that they talk about, some very simple, but many are very technical, and a lot of them involve automation. I'm wondering, obviously you couldn't necessarily do that here, but what sorts of automated attacks would you have attempted if given the chance?
If given permission, I would have, like with this password reset thing, I would have automated that to demonstrate how easy or how difficult it might be to collect information. As far as accessing documents as one user that belong to another, that's another thing that would have been easy to automate because these were all built on REST services underneath. And I'm seeing evidence that they're slowly changing, giving less to the browser there, so it is getting better. But many of these things in attacks could be automated as far as the actual execution, but the considering what attacks to try and setting up approaching that just like any other testing that requires someone to be thinking about it, and the actual testing isn't done by the automation. And you mentioned OWASP, which is a great source. It's also on my Is There a Problem Here blog in the left column, and there's a link to it, but they periodically update and they publish a top 10 list of types of vulnerabilities and include some information on guidelines for avoiding these vulnerabilities. That's that's a good source to help build some oracles off of.
Okay, that was it for today. Ben, thank you for this awesome presentation. Awesome.
Thank you.